All right, and we're recording. At least that's what it says on my computer. Okay, great. Looks like Cecilia just showed up. Great. So perfect timing. She's not going to miss anything. So great. We've actually got some participants for this meeting. That's great. Hopefully, maybe you guys can put some input in. If I go too fast or something, or you have a comment or question any time along the way, feel free to pipe in, unmute your mic and whatever. But I'm really just going to go over the highlights of the chapter on Jainism, and we're not going to spend too much time on it. I was telling some of the students earlier, this should take maybe 30 minutes or so. There's a little bit more info in the chapter, obviously. I just, like I said, going over the highlights, sort of the main points about Jainism. Out of all the traditions we're studying, I guess this one in Shinto would probably be the one that has the least amount of followers, adherents. But unlike Shinto, I think Jainism still has prospects for a future. Shinto seems to be fading away, whereas Jainism, they're still, it seems to have leveled out the number of followers. It's not really in decline. It's not really growing either. And it's the second religion that we're going to be looking at in Unit 1. The first one, obviously, was Hinduism. We just finished covering that. And next will be Buddhism. Most people don't think of India when they think of Buddhism. They think of the further east. They think of China, Japan. But, so a lot of people don't know that the Buddha himself came from the same region of the Indian subcontinent as Jainism. So if we look at the map here, right, sort of northern India, where modern-day Nepal is, this very mountainous region, this is where, the Buddha himself, and we'll talk more about him when we get to Buddhism. We'll start that later tonight. And this is where Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, comes from as well. So Mahavira, or sometimes he's just referred to without the A, Mahavir. He's considered the founder of this religion, although we'll talk about this, it gets a little bit more complicated. Like many of these traditions, even though there's a historical figure that we associate with the founding of the tradition, many practitioners who believe in this tradition, they'll make this claim that it goes back further, right? That these teachings go back beyond Mahavir himself. So it's one of the religions besides Buddhism that is from this region, right? From the back up here, from the Indian subcontinent, that's not based on Vedic literature. So all the traditions that we are referring to as Hinduism in this course, all the different practices, are more or less based in some way on Vedic literature, on the Rig Veda, the Upanishad, some of these texts that we talked about, the epics. Whereas Jainism is its own thing. Buddhism, its own thing. It has its own teacher, its own teachings. Although there are some parallels, we'll see. There's some beliefs, some key beliefs really in Jainism that's pretty much the same. I mean, they're a little understood a little bit differently, but things like karma, samsara, Jainism shares these beliefs with Hindu. But again, we'll talk about this in more depth as we move on. Again, Mahavir is the historical founder. Mahavira means the great hero. And according to the tradition, he is just the great teacher for this age. There have been many before him. And we believe, our best guess is that he died and lived around the 6th century, maybe going back as far as the 5th century. So he was a contemporary of the Buddha. He was a contemporary of Siddhartha Gautama, who we'll talk about in more depth, obviously, when we move on to Buddhism. According to our textbook, Mahavira died approximately 527 BCE. So again, this is 5th century, 6th century BCE, same time that, or actually not really exactly the same time as the epics, but once Jainism and Buddhism start to develop and become, pretty big religions in their own right in this region, this is when the composition of those Hindu epics takes place. And many people think that is as a direct response to Jainism and Buddhism and some of the challenges that they pose, some of the converts that they gain over. So again, the founder Mahavira, he was much like the Buddha. There's a lot of parallels between him and the Buddha. You'll see when we get to Buddhism and I tell you the story of the Buddha, sort of legend of the Buddha, there are a lot of parallels here between the two. They were both Kshatriya. Anybody remember what a Kshatriya was? I doubt it, maybe, unless you memorized all your castes, the different 4 castes in the Hindu caste system. Remember, you had the Brahmins on the top, and then below them is the Kshatriya. What does that mean?
Yeah, I did the essay, the quiz essay on that.
Okay, so who were the Kshatriya?
I forgot. Let me see.
They were the second. So the top was the Brahmins, then below Kshatriya.
Oh, okay, yeah, they were the king warriors.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was a king, warrior type, princely type. Same thing with the Buddha. And he renounced his wealth at a certain age. When he got to 30 years old around, he renounces his wealth and his title as a prince, and he becomes this ascetic monk who tries to find this path towards spirituality. And there's one account that says he was married and he even fulfills all his householder duties that are a part of the Hindu tradition before he has this great renunciation. So again, he forsakes all of his wealth and all his claim to power and his nobility, and he undertakes what were known as austerities. Does anybody know what the word austerity means? Anybody familiar with that term? If you're being austere? No? It means that you're kind of like depriving yourself. So he deprived himself of worldly pleasures, okay? And he also had to endure much pain as well and much temptation. So here we have, in this image you see here on the right, this painting, he's being tempted by all these beautiful women. He's being burnt by fire. It looks like there's bugs crawling all over him and all these animals that are trying to scare him and demons. And as he's meditating and trying to ignore all this stuff, but he remains calm throughout all this. And apparently after 12 years of these austerities, of this meditative practice of silence, fasting, he was able to achieve liberation and perfection. And then he was able to be cured of any sort of temptations, any hunger, any cravings, or any thirst. And then he was, at that point, he spread his teachings. Oh, I need to back up. We're not to the THIRTHANKARAS yet. He spread his teachings to the first school, a community of and they have very precise numbers here, so I have to look at my notes. There were 14,100 monks, 36,000 nuns, 310,000 female, and 150,000 male lay followers. So we need to keep this clear too. So there's lay followers, and then there are the monks and the nuns. So the requirements, the rituals and the ethical requirements of the nuns and the monks are much more strict. They're much more rigid than someone who's a lay follower. So when we start talking about the practices of these monks, these Jainist monks, a lot of these practices seem very, kind of crazy. Like, people are like, who would want to join this religion? You would have to do this. But just keep in mind, these are supposed to be the monks, the ones who are special, right? Not just anybody who practices Jainism. So I guess it's not quite as rigid as it sounds if you just read the textbook and look at the practice of the monks themselves. So anyway, he forms this community, with all these numbers. And one distinctive feature of Jainism that's certainly different from Hinduism is, we were just talking about the caste system. Jainism does away with the caste system. It allows anybody from any level of society, whether you're, one of in the merchant caste, whether you're in the warrior caste or the priestly caste, anybody who wants to become a Jainist can become. Now, whether or not women can join, this is something that's controversial. We'll talk about it. There's a big split. There's a divide within Jainism about this question. But again, one thing that is definitely for certain is that they didn't make the caste distinctions. This is something that Jainists will share with the Buddhists. You'll see when we get to Buddhism, that's something else that he demanded, that we look past social class, and anybody that wants to be open to enlightenment can take this path. Now, I mentioned this earlier, or at least I alluded to it. All these teachings of Mahavira, these teachings that he learned through this practice of great austerity, are thought to be older than him. They go back. He's supposed to be the 24th in a long line of Tirthankaras. That literally means a Ford maker, somebody who carves out a path for others to follow. So the Tirthankaras are Ford makers of the cosmic cycle. We'll talk a little bit more about the cosmic cycle in just a moment here. This is just a painting I found. I think this is on the Wikipedia page for Tirthankaras, and it's supposed to have all 24 of them leading up to Mahavira. So again, he's not the first one. He's the most recent one, the one from our period. It even looks like a few of them may be females. Don't you see? It looks like some of them up here in the top left corner. I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to tell. Some of these paintings are supposed to be androgynous anyway, to have both male and female features. Like they have a balance of these two energies within themselves. But again, Mahavira, although he's supposed to be like this really important figure in Jainism, just like Siddhartha Gautama is to the Buddhists, he's also thought to be just one of many. He's just the most recent. He's the one that has brought these teachings to our time. So I talked about the cosmic cycle. These are the Ford makers of the cosmic cycle. What is the cosmic cycle? So the cosmos is our universe. There's a cycle, apparently. Just like in Hinduism, they believe that there's a cycle. And for the Jainist, there is no beginning to the universe. There's no end to the universe per se. It just passes through cycles of progress and decline, much like the waxing and the waning of the moon. There's high points, there's low points. At the high points of the cycle, that's when humans are happy. And when things start to get really bad, that's the declining cycle. This is when Tirthankaras, these Ford makers, have to come in and intervene, and they have to create religion and bring dharma, the teachings, to the people to steer them away from the growing evil. So if you look to the in the textbook, there's a it's a pretty brief history of the Tirthankaras, but it's on page 120, I think, of the let's see, this is the 10th edition. If you have an earlier edition, I think it's just off by a page or two. But it's towards the bottom. The author writes, hagiographies of the Tirthankaras are major sources of ethical instruction and inspirations for Jain. So hagiography, that's like a bunch of hieroglyphics. So what we were just looking at, we back up that slide, that's a hagiography. I guess there's some that are more detailed that show scenes from the lives of these Tirthankaras. So again, these are major sources of ethical instruction and inspiration for Jains. The first Tirthankara introduced civilizing social institutions such as marriage, family, law, justice, and government, taught the arts and agriculture, crafts, reading, writing, mathematics, built villages, towns, and cities. This sounds a bit like some of the things we'll be talking about when we get to some of the Chinese traditions, some of the more folk versions of Taoism. We'll talk about how there's some deities in the more religious Taoism that are associated with bringing language, with bringing music, with bringing agriculture to people. And so supposedly they have these Tirthankaras that fulfill the same function. Now, don't get confused here, though. They're not supposed to be doing all this stuff. This is for the lay followers, right? A Tirthankara, a monk, is probably someone who's going to be meditating and teaching, not someone who's going to be actually being an artisan or a merchant or building a village or something like this. 23 more Tirthankaras followed over a vast expanse of time. The 22nd is generally acknowledged by scholars as an historic figure, Lord Krishna's cousin, renowned for his compassion towards animals. So he's sort of, if you're Catholic and maybe you're familiar with St. Francis, isn't he the one that's he always says he's pictured with animals around him? It seems like there's always some sort of figure like this. Not always, but there's often some saintly figure like this in many of these traditions of someone who's in touch with nature, some saintly, maybe even poor, discards wealth to help poor people, lives in the woods and talks to animals and things, right? So this was the 22nd Tirthankara that's being referred to here. He's a prince that became an ascetic and a great preacher. He lived between 877 to 777 BCE. So this is a couple hundred years before Mahavir pops up. His traditional hagiographies, like his traditional hieroglyphs, you see stories about him. They're interesting resemblances to those of the Buddha, such as his terrific confrontation with Mara, that's the demon of death, the goddess of death, while meditating, after which he emerged serene and omniscient. In Jain iconography, which may derive from prehistoric myths, the 23rd Tirthankara, that's the one right before Mahavir, is typically shown protected by a multi-headed snake forming a canopy over his head, right? So there's a lot more to this. This might be an interesting topic for a research paper. If you want to find out more about the Tirthankaras, you could dig in deeper and, maybe pick 2 or 3 that have interesting hagiographies, to use that fancy term from the textbook, and look deeper into it. But that'd be like a proper topic for a research paper, I would think. So anyways, like back to the show. After Mahavir, starts his community and dies, the like many of these traditions, it's continued on through an oral tradition for many years, and it's not until the 3rd century BCE, so this is maybe about 200 years almost after the death of Mahavir, there was this big split in the Jainist tradition. There were some monks that split off, and apparently they moved south. They went to southern India to avoid a famine. And when they returned, they found that some of the Jainist requirements had been relaxed. Some of the early requirements were that they had to be nude. They couldn't wear clothing. That was seen as not austere enough. Like, clothing protects you, it makes you feel comfortable. Don't wear clothing, it's bad. And you weren't supposed to write. Writing was seen as not a good thing, especially the Holy Scripture. The Holy Scripture was so holy, it was seen as almost sacrilegious to write it, that was something that only could be passed on spiritually from person to person, from one person's mind or soul to the other. And so when these Jainist monks moved south and then moved back after the famine, they saw that some of the practices had changed, and they didn't like this. So there was eventually this big rift between these 2 groups, and they split up into the 2 groups. The Digambara, who are the Sky-clad, right? They were the ones that were thought to have remained, and they still go nude, right? If you're a Jainist monk and you're a part of the Digambara faction, then yeah, you're not supposed to even wear clothing, okay? You're not supposed to wear any clothing. Now the nuns wear clothing, but it's still seen as, it's I guess sort of patriarchal. The nuns can't achieve enlightenment in this lifetime. They're maybe one step away. When they're reborn, they might be able to be a Jainist monk, but for now, as nuns, they just look after the monks and clean the temple and make sure that the monks aren't distracted and have time to just meditate and worry about spiritual matters. So again, there's this split between the Digambara, the Sky-clad, and the SVETAMBARA, who we'll talk a little bit more about later. They're the ones that, they're the ones that stayed behind. They're the ones that stayed near the region where Mahavira lived. I got it backwards. The Digambaras, oddly enough, the Sky-clad are the ones that left and did not accept the changes. Wait, I got it right. I actually got it right the first time. They split after they realized. They said, forget it, we're leaving, and we're going to start our own sect, right? So there, again, here's a picture of one of these nuns. She's cleaning a statue of Mahavir, taking care of the temple, while this monk is sitting there, I guess, giving reverence to Mahavir for bringing these teachings to mankind. Looks like he has a little brush there. I'm guessing that brush, there's probably a name for it. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Jainism, but I'm guessing that brush is there to avoid, he probably sweeps the floor before he sits down because he wants to avoid hurting any living thing. And so there might be some microscopic living beings that he can't see. And so in order to avoid that, in order to avoid harm, he probably carries this around with him around the temple as you know, as he's moving about, and does this probably very slowly. So the nude, again, they see the environment as their garment. Okay, and clothing is I guess decadent or something like this. And also, you might see it this way too: clothing harms living things. Even plants that are used to make the clothing have to be destroyed. And so maybe that's another way of avoiding harming other living beings. We'll get more
Because
into this.
I
Yeah,
seen that they were really like they didn't want to do no harm to nothing,
right,
not even
exactly.
yeah, not even no, if even if it
Like
meant like
plants,
to
yeah,
go yeah
yeah,
anything
or even a stone. You're not even supposed to, like, you know how sometimes, like, I don't
yeah
know, I know I do this, like, I'll kick a rock down the street, just like I'm having a walk, and I'll just, like, just for like a little game I play, you know, I'll kick the stone, and then I'll walk up to it and just keep kicking it down the street. You don't do that. No,
yeah
because like for
yeah they
the,
were against that every
yeah,
little yeah
because they actually believe too that there's energy or life force in everything. So even that stone has some sort of life force in it. So you want to avoid harming it. So even kicking a little pebble down the street was seen as a no-no for the monks. Yeah, exactly. Um, and they're only supposed to have two possessions: a small gourd that they carry around for drinking, and a broom. Right. This, like, I guess this is one right here picture that
yeah
has
to
feathers. You know.
yeah to clean the microscopic animals so they
Right.
won't harm them.
Right. And as I mentioned earlier, women are not thought to, you know, they're allowed in the tribe, but they're not pure enough yet. Again, a little sexism here, I suppose you could say. They need to be reborn as a man in order to be fully liberated. And so they really can't renounce clothing. They're not allowed to renounce clothing. And they're not even allowed to be skillful debaters. They're not allowed to be advocates for their own religion. So that's something that's, you know, you might see as controversial and unfortunate. Okay, so moving on to the SVETAMBARA. Okay, so they're the white-clad. They wear these very simple robes. So they don't want to wear anything ornate. You know, you don't want to wear jewelry or fancy clothing, but they do wear these simple white robes. And their argument for this is that Mahavira, you know, the original founder, the 24th Tirthankara, that he was originally in clothing, but his loincloth got stuck in a bush while he was walking, and he didn't want to hurt the bush, like he didn't want to hurt the plant, so he just, you know, slipped out of his clothing. And he actually wasn't in perpetual meditation either, so he wasn't spending his time, you know, like these guys just sitting around the temple all day just meditating. He actually spent some of his time spreading the word. He went out and he spread the teaching. So he got involved with the community. So the Svetambaras, you know, they see it a little differently. You know, they say, yes, of course, meditation is good, but, you know, they're not quite, I guess you could say they're not quite as austere as the Digambaras. And for them too, they believe that women are capable of the same spiritual achievements as men. So here's some more pictures of the Svetambara, the white-clad. There's one, he's got his broom. Why are they wearing masks over their face? Can anybody tell me that? Maybe somebody, it sounds like Stephanie read the chapter. Did you remember what they said about that? Why do they wear the masks over their face?
Let me
You don't
see.
remember? You have
I
a
don't
guess?
remember that
You have a
part.
guess? Maybe you could take a guess. It's pretty close to the reason why those guys have. Why do they have brooms?
Oh, they didn't want to breathe in no microscopic. They said that that was also one of the part that it was.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So yeah, they were afraid that they might breathe in a bug on accident or
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. So yeah, they don't want to. They want to cover their mouth just in case. So it's not because of COVID. It's because of, like,
No,
yeah.
no, not because of
Yeah,
COVID.
yeah. It's not COVID. They did this already before. They were like ahead of the game with that. But they were doing it, you know, because they didn't want to harm any living things by accidentally breathing them in. Good, good. Okay, so and there's some women. There's some Svetambara women. Now, and actually, I don't really know this. I'm kind of questionable. I think this is questionable. I'm not really sure. I did a Google image search to find Svetambara women, and this is what I got. But the gentleman who's with them looks like he's wearing a Sikh head ornamentation. So these might actually be Sikh women. So take this image here with the grain of salt. Um, But moving on to some of like the basic teachings of Jainism, what are the kind of the ethical pillars? That's one of the important things. It seems like Jainism, we talked about the cosmology, their theory of the universe and how it's waxing and waning. They don't, it seems like most of the writings don't focus on that so much. They focus on how to live a good life and how to practice Jainism well and be a good practitioner. So this stuff I think is more important. This is kind of the meat of the matter. And I have just a list of terms here. If you look at the bottom there, I have those three terms: ahimsa, aparigraha, anekantwad. I'm probably not pronouncing that last one correctly, but these three are really the pillars of Jainism. They're the pillars, the ethical pillars of Jainism. So we need to elaborate on those when we get to them. But those first bullet points I have listed, those are really just some terminology that we need to become familiar with when we're talking about Jainism. And there's a lot of parallels here you'll see with Hinduism. So some of these terms are different, but they mean very similar things to some of the terms that we got to in Hinduism. So remember that for the Jain, we're the Jainist, the belief is that we're living in a time of decline, that the world is in decline. And if you're able to get out of this this realm and you're able to liberate yourself, it's through the work of the jiva, right? So a jiva simply means somebody who has a higher consciousness, somebody who has achieved a higher consciousness or soul. This might be, you might, when we get to Buddhism, we'll talk about bodhisattvas. We'll talk about also in other forms of Buddhism, sannyasins. Not sannyasins, what am I saying? That's the Hindu. Oh, forget it. I'll remember when I stop thinking of it. There's in earlier forms of Buddhism, the Theravada Buddhism, they call it arahant, I think is what they call it. Somebody who is enlightened, who has found the way and is able to sort of save others and spread the teaching. So again, a jiva is an individual's. And also I think maybe too they use this term in the same sense as the Hindu uses the Atman. So who remembers what the Atman was? Did y'all maybe was that on the quiz? I don't know. But what was the Atman? Remember the Atman was one of the vocabulary words from.
I think it was one of the cycle. I think it was the cycle. Was that the cycle? The life cycle? No.
Nah. It's your true self, right? So
oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, like the goal of like Hindu.
Oh yeah, in order to get to Atman, no, in order to go to Mahavira.
To get moksha, to get out of that cycle of samsara.
Yeah.
Right? And so samsara is the second word, right? Samsara is that cycle of birth and death and rebirth. You keep getting reincarnated. But if you discover your Atman, or here jiva, your true enlightened self, your higher consciousness, right? If you become jiva, then you're able to break out of that cycle. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, right.
I had it somewhere around there.
Yeah. So this is a belief that they use different terminology, but it's fairly similar to what Buddhists believe, what Hindus believe. How you achieve it might be slightly different. Who's able to achieve it? Whether it can be a man or a woman or somebody who's rich or poor. That's debate. That might differ between these traditions. But this notion of like a cycle of samsara and Buddhism, you'll see, doesn't have a notion of a true self. That's where they're a bit different. There's no true self. There is no self for the Buddha. That's sort of part of the enlightenment, is realizing that there is no self. So you have to, this is going to sound a lot like Buddhism. So when we start on Buddhism tonight, if y'all are there, you're going to be like, oh, this sounds like Jainism. Again, they came around the same time, very similar founders, a lot of parallels. No surprise here, a very ascetic approach. You're supposed to extricate yourself from all attachment to the material world, purify yourself until there's nothing that remains except for the purity of the jiva, right? Of your true self. Yourself in its true state, fully omniscient, knowing all, shining forth, potent, fully powerful, peaceful, self-contained, and blissful. And if you've achieved this state, once you've uncovered your true self, you're known as a Jaina, right? That capital J, a Jaina, and that's actually as far as I know, I mean, I've heard this and I've read it several places. It sounds kind of fantastic. I think it's the same etymology of the word genie. So if you hear the word genie, you know, like from, you know, the 1001 Nights, similar etymology, similar word origin. Not exactly the same region, but pretty close geographically. So the word genie and Gina are related, but they mean different things in, you know, those different parts of the world. Obviously, a Gina is a spiritual being, right? Somebody who has uncovered their true self, uncovered their jiva. And it literally means a winner is what it means. So they won, right? They won, and they won they won over their passions, right? Their passions were trying to control them. There was this battle between them and their desires. They were able to win. So karma, okay, just like Hinduism, there's a notion of karma. You'll see that in Buddhism, no different. There's also a notion of karma. The idea is that our lives, the lives that we live right now, currently, they're the result of our own deeds, our own actions, and it's only by our own efforts that we can be saved. So you'll see when we get to Buddhism, that Jainism is a very, you might say, it's a religion that makes you, it encourages you to be very self-reliant spiritually. So it gives you a path, but it's very insistent that, you know, you're the only one that can do this. You have to be able to do it. If you don't, you know, it's kind of your fault, you know, sort of thing. Whereas, you know, Hinduism, you know, there might be some paths that are that way. If you're a Brahmin, there's a more austere path. But if you're, you know, somebody who's just doing bhakti yoga, if you're one of the lower caste and you just go to the temple every weekend and you do devotional praise to a particular deva, then that's what you do to fulfill your duties. But this is very much like, no, you can't grasp onto a deity. You can't grasp onto some spirit that's going to save you. You have to do it yourself, right? It's going to take a lot of work on your own. And so you might argue that their teaching of karma is a little bit, it's even more, I don't know the word I'm looking for. It puts even more emphasis on the individual, I guess I could say. It's the best way of putting it, for correcting karmic imbalances and trying to correct them. You know, your karma's in your own hands, I guess you might say. Don't look to Krishna or Shiva or whoever your patron deity is. They won't help you. Only you can help you. Is I guess sort of the takeaway from the Jainists when it comes to karma. So again, they see any love to God, a savior God, they see that as a form of attachment, and it'll bind you more securely to the cycle of samsara, right? So it actually is self-defeating. All these Hindus who are doing bhakti yoga, the Jainists would say that's actually self-defeating. You think that by attaching yourself to these gods and like being all crazy in your rituals and like showing that you love them so much and being emotional, that's actually, no, that's bad. That's the wrong path. You need to learn to detach yourself from those sort of things. So a little bit more on karma. Let me look at my notes here so I don't skip any important stuff before I move on to Kabbalah and some of the other things I have listed here. So again, it's very subtle. I think this is it's pretty apparent from what we said before, but karma is very, very subtle in Jainism in the sense that every minute little thing you do affects every other little thing. It's sort of, maybe you've heard of the butterfly effect, the idea that, like, you know, butterflies' wings fluttering on one side of the world, you know, affects something on the other end of the planet or something. Jainists take this very literally, that every little thing you do, so you have to be very careful about your actions. As you saw, the monks were sweeping the ground in front of them, making sure they didn't harm any microscopic insects. Some of them wear the little cloth in front of their mouth so they don't swallow anything. I think I have a list here I have written in my notes. Let me look. There's a lot of practices, very austere practices. So karma are minute particles that we accumulate as we act and as we think. So even thinking bad thoughts, being like angry at people for some reason, that's another form of it. You don't even have to actually act on it. That's a very Christian ethic too. You know, like what did, you know, Jesus says, you know, or not even Jesus. I mean, you go back to Moses, you know, don't even covet your neighbor's wife, right? You shouldn't even covet, don't even think about it. And then he says, what is Jesus? Jesus says something like, they say thou shalt not kill, or just as bad. You know, you might as well kill just thinking about it. Um, you know, they're both just as bad. So the Janus too, it's sort of this, it's not just your outward actions, but your internal thoughts. That's going to affect your karma. So a very, you know, very strict interpretation, I think, of karma, maybe compared to, you might argue, compared to some forms of Hinduism. Um, so until you free yourself from all these karmas, all this buildup of this accumulation of attachment and action and things like this, your mundane soul, right, your jiva, continues to wander through the universe in this endless cycle of samsara. Um, I don't know if this is in your textbook. I didn't get a chance to read the 10th edition. I've read like the 7th and the 9th edition, but there's a story. They took out some of the cool stories. There was like some really cool stories in the earlier editions, and they removed some of them. Some of them were kind of, I don't know, naughty and a bit racy, so I can kind of see why, but they were fun. But they were talking, there was a story of the warring brothers, and they're about to kill each other over property. And then they realize that they have like this evil passion, like, oh my goodness, I was about to kill my brother for land or for property, and so he becomes this ascetic and detaches himself from all, you know, needs and desires.
It's the story of Bahubali, right?
Yeah.
The story of Bahubali.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's the name. Okay, so it is in the 10th edition.
I have the 7th edition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, then that's the one I got it from. Okay, that's the original. Okay. Yeah. So it's definitely in the 7th one. But then he actually has, like, when he becomes the ascetic monk, he has a further enlightenment, because at first he's like, he's mad at his brother, or he wants his brother's land, and then he's like, how dare I? I was going to kill my brother for his land. And then he realizes his land, it doesn't belong to anybody. Property is just a bad idea. Like, so he's even further enlightened after he detaches himself, you know, from even his brother, and thinking of that, like, oh, I was going to destroy my brother's property. He's like, well, why does my brother even own it? It's the universe's land. It belongs to the universe. It belongs to all. I think that's the quote I have here. It's universal soil. So just like the Hindus, they seem to think that if you're born as a human, that's a really good sign. It means that your previous forms of existence were at least good enough to merit you a chance out of that cycle. But you better take advantage of it, right? Because you don't have much time in your life, and so you better make the most of it, and try not to accumulate any of this karma, and try to, I guess, you know, not affect anything in any negative way, and even mentally. So you have to eliminate within yourself any sort of false impressions, any negative tendencies you have, any passion for anything, even if it's a good or positive passion. You know, if you're really excited about something, you have to, oh wait, you know, I'm really excited about going to the gym. I like to work out. I like it too much. No, I'm enjoying that. No, even if it's good for you, if you're really, you know, into it. So again, a very strict regimen, especially for the Jainist monks. So Kevala, I still haven't got to that yet. That is, I guess that's their form of moksha. Remember what moksha was from Hindu? In Buddhism, they talk about nirvana. That's one word. But what? Anybody familiar with the word nirvana? Not the band, not the rock band, but the actual. What is Buddhist nirvana or moksha? Moksha. Oh. It's liberation.
I heard it was a moksha. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's Kevala, it's liberation, right? You break the cycle of samsara, right? So again, a similar notion in Buddhism is nirvana, and in Hindu it would be moksha. Right? But for the Jains, they call this state of liberation and breaking that cycle. This it's kind of the goal, and that's your goal. If you're training spiritually, your goal is to achieve Kevala. So, all right, let me pause here, take a sip of water. We're almost through with this. I just got like maybe a page left of notes. And we're getting into really what are the ethical pillars of Jainism. Ahimsa, Aparigraha, Anekantva. These are the three jewels. They're called the three jewels of Jainism. Now, Ahimsa, it is roughly translated as non-violence. So, non-violence, non-injury. This notion was super influential to Gandhi. They mentioned Gandhi in the Hindu chapter. Okay, now Gandhi was a Hindu, but he studied most of the world's major religions, and this is one of the main things he drew from the Jainist tradition, was this notion of non-harm, non-violence, not using, and it was a powerful force. Gandhi argued that if you were non-violent, that your spirit or your soul would sort of shine forth in a sense. So let me see, what do I have written here? Let me elaborate a little bit more on ahimsa. Oh, wait, well, let me go over all three. So first, okay, again, ahimsa, non-violence. Apahagraha is non-attachment, so not being attached to certain things. And Anekantva, that's the one I'm really the least confident about my pronunciation of, is non-absolutism. So you're not absolute in the sense that you don't think that your view is absolutely correct or anybody's view is absolutely correct, and you're open to all ways of seeing truth, or I guess, yeah, or you're open to the idea that there are many ways of seeing truth and none are complete.
Yeah, you gotta look at it from different ways.
Right.
Is
So
that
we'll
what it
get,
was? Yeah.
yeah, we'll elaborate on that a little bit more. We'll talk about, I hope this is in the 10th edition, but I know in the 7th edition they have the story of the blind people and the elephant. Is that in the? I know Stephanie.
Yeah. I
So,
had, yeah. I read. Yeah, I
so
read
I
that.
hope it's in the 10th edition. Again, I didn't have time to read the new version, but I'll tell you the story for those of you, Mercedes and Cecilia. If you have the new version and you don't know the story, I'll go over it. But again, Ahimsa, Aparigraha, and Anekantva, those are the three jewels. Those are the three main tenets, you might say, of Jainist ethics. Again, non-violence, non-attachment, and non-absolutism. So again, let me look at my notes here. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on all three of these, and then we're pretty much going to be done, I think. I'll show you. I've got a few more slides to show you of some of the Jainist temples. I think that's about all I got. Okay, so we're coming pretty close to the end of the lecture here, so just hang with me. I just want to make sure I get all the highlights, as I said, of the chapter. So another thing that I think you should have already gathered from what's been said before in this lecture, Jains think of the universe as filled, every point of the universe is filled with something that's living, some force, some life, some living beings, some of them very, very minute. So a single drop of water, for instance, they think contains 3,000 living beings. So you'll see, I think some of the monks they filter their water through cloth to make sure that they don't accidentally drink some of these bugs. So if you kill any living being, that has negative karmic effects. So they want to avoid this. And it's very difficult to avoid. Actually, there's another passage from the book I want to read. I think that this is page 123. Let's see. Yeah, it's starting on 123. It is difficult not to do violence to other creatures. Even in breathing, Jains feel, we inhale tiny organisms and kill them. Observant Jains avoid eating after sunset so as not to eat unseen insects that might have landed on the food, and some Jain ascetics wear a cloth over their mouth to avoid inhaling any living organisms. The higher the life form, the heavier the karmic burden of its destruction. The highest group of beings are those with many senses, such as humans, gods, and higher animals. This is interesting. So the Jains believe in gods, but this is what's interesting. They don't think the gods can get out of the karmic cycle because they're not humans. They're not tempted. They're gods, right? So that's a bit of a digression. So back to the I forgot about that, but I remember, oh yeah, they believe in the gods, but they think that they're actually in a better position to get out of samsara than the gods. So lower forms have fewer senses. The one-sensed beings have only the sense of touch. They include plants and earth bodies and soil, minerals and stones, water bodies and rivers and lakes, fires, etc. The Jain Sutras describe the suffering of even those one-sensed beings. It is like that of a blind and mute person who cannot see who is hurting him or express the pain. And then there's a quote from one of the sutras, one of the scriptures. I'm going to skip that and read that next paragraph. Again, more about these strict practices of ahimsa, right? Non-violence, not harming anything. So Jains are strict vegetarians. They treat everything with great care. In Delhi, Jain benefactors have established a unique charitable hospital for sick and wounded birds. Great attention is paid to every need, and their living quarters are air-cooled in the summer. Some Jains also go to markets where live animals are usually bound with wire, packed into hot trucks, and driven long distances without water to be killed for meat. They try to save the animals from suffering. They buy them and attempt to raise them in comfort. Even to kick a stone, I was mentioning this earlier, even to kick a stone while walking is to injure living beings. So Jains are keenly aware that we may cause violence even through the clothes that we buy. Many Jains thus eschew, right? They don't wear leather and silk. So yeah, again, very austere. So even if you're a layman, Jain, you are expected to be vegetarian, vegan. They don't wear silk. They don't wear leather. So you don't have to be a monk, and you're still expected to follow these practices, right? You might not have to wear a cloth over your mouth. You might not have to spend your whole half your day in a temple, but you are expected to do some of this stuff, right? So let me make sure I get through all that I want to say. Okay, yeah, also, and I think I already said this, but just I'll repeat, it also extends to speaking. It's not just what you do, it's what you say, to thinking. So your words and your thoughts can injure others, so you have to keep those in check. Your profession, what you do for a living, it has to be such that it doesn't injure any being. So what do Jainists do typically? What are they known for doing in India? Who did the reading, and who knows, who remembers from the chapter? So if what you do for a living can't harm anybody, they can't be farmers, they say, because you have to kill all those living plants to be a farmer. What could you do that doesn't harm anybody? This might not be an obvious answer because nobody likes these kind of people nowadays. Everybody seems to be mad at these kind of people, especially the United States after the financial collapse. No, nobody knows.
No, not sure.
They're bankers. Most of them are in banking and finance. Some are in like they're lawyers, they're bankers, publishing. They might get into publishing. But I'm just like, well, publishing, you have to kill trees to make
Oh,
books.
okay. Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
It seems to me like no matter what you do nowadays, you're gonna harm a living being. It's like,
Yeah.
but they like bankers. You're gonna finance people that are farmers. You're gonna finance people that are gonna. I guess they're able to remove themselves further from it. That might be less of a karmic effect. I don't know. I'd have to ask. Maybe a Jain monk would have a good answer for me. But it seems to me like banking nowadays doesn't seem to be like it. I don't know, it seems like it does some harm. It can do a lot of harm to a lot of people if it's done wrong. But again, I mentioned this already. Agriculture is harmful. What about I think I've said enough about non-attachment. What about aparigraha, right? So this is non-attachment. I've said enough about ahimsa, non-violence. Again, you want to live a very minimalist lifestyle, so you don't want to spend all this money on fancy bling bling, etc., etc. No Gucci purses, no fur coats. Especially, I'm sure Gucci uses leather on their stuff, so that's already out the window. But again, you want to live very simple clothing. Even attachments to your friends and your relatives are seen as impediments to breaking out of this cycle of samsara. So things that you might think of as actually kind of good, you're doing a good thing to care so much about your kids and your family. But if you put too much truck in those, then even that might get in the way of enlightenment for them. We have to live helpfully and consciously through the world. We have to be aware of the snares that entrap us, like the temptations of money and wealth and family. And this mode of non-attachment, very similar to the Buddhist, and you might say some forms of Hinduism, right? If you're a sannyasin, if you're a Brahmin, a priest, a Hindu priest, this is a very similar path, right? A path of non-attachment. Let yourself go, cut yourself off from worldly things, and then you will break out of that cycle of attachment and rebirth and that whole cycle. So again, we'll see these themes repeated in the Buddhist religion. You might argue that they're already there in some of the Hindu traditions. So the last one, Anet Kantwad. This is my favorite one. I like this one. This is the non-absolutism. I think a better translation is manifold aspects. That just sounds cooler, right? That there are manifold, many aspects, many ways of seeing, many angles around truth, and many ways of looking at it, and all of us are stuck in our perspective. So we're only able to see truth from a certain light. So we have to avoid anger. We have to avoid judgmental attitudes towards people that don't agree with us. This maybe is a good teaching for our times, right? With our country so divided politically, right? Maybe Anet Kantwad is something that we can learn from the Jains. And so again, we have to remain, because of this, we have to remain open-minded. We have to realize again that we only have our viewpoint, and our viewpoint is limited. And so when we come up to someone else, they have a viewpoint that is also limited. We have to be understanding about that. So I mentioned earlier, there's this Jainist story, fable, whatever you want to call it, parable of the blind people, the blind men. And they're all blind, and they're standing next to an elephant, right? So somebody asks them, what is this thing? And one of them grabs the elephant's leg, and one of them grabs the elephant's tail, and one of them grabs the elephant's trunk, and one of them
ear.
or the ear or whatever. So I think it's like the one that grabs the leg thinks it's a pillar. Oh, it's a pillar, right?
Yeah.
The one that grabs the side of his body thinks it's a wall. It's just a big wall. The one that grabs his trunk
is a rope.
Oh, it's a rope. Yeah, the other one thinks it's a snake or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, so we're all that person. We're all a blind man. We're all, each of us is gonna, because of maybe our culture. This reminds me a lot of, there's a Western philosopher named Nietzsche. He was a German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. He talks about how our body, our physiology, makes us see the world differently. So if we're big and strong, we're not as intimidated by certain things, and we might not even be aware of how big and strong we are, and how people are kind of respect us, and we get this sort of respect, and that changes our attitude and the way we act about it and the way that we react. And we have all these biases that they might not even just be cultural or psychological, but even physiological. He makes a comparison to Nietzsche in one of his essays. He talks about these eagles and these baby lambs, or just lambs, okay? And the eagles kill the lambs. They fly down and they swoop and they grab the baby lambs and they carry them off and they kill them and they eat them, right? And so Nietzsche's like, now imagine if these lambs could talk, what kind of things they would say about the eagles. They would say, they're evil, they're demonic, they kill our young, they're the most disgusting, vile creatures in the universe. And Nietzsche's like, yeah, I mean, if you were a lamb, that's probably how you would see things. That totally makes sense. But let's go talk to the eagles and see what they say. And the eagles are going to be like, the lambs don't like us. We have nothing against them. We love little lambs. They're very cute and soft and tender and delicious, And he's like, now, who's right? He's like, who can help if you're an eagle, let's say, and you've got these razor sharp claws and you're super strong and you have a physique, you're able to fly above the sky and see all these, like a mouse scurrying below in the field, and you can swoop down. You're going to have a certain engagement with the world, and you're going to see certain things in a certain light. So you're going to see a baby lamb as, nice and cute and delicious, whereas the lamb is going to see the eagle as a threat, and rightly
dangerous,
so, rightly so. So he's like the Jainists are kind of saying the same thing. Like, all of us have our own way of seeing the world, which is maybe valid. Like, it's valid for the lambs to be scared of the freaking eagles. But we have to understand that, like, the eagles probably have no idea. I mean, I would avoid an eagle too, and I probably am sympathizing more with lamb. Even though I eat them myself, I do like a good lamb chop, so I don't know. But anyway, back to the Jainist. Again, this notion is of Anakantwad. I like it a lot. I think it's a good lesson that we can take away. You know, whether or not you're gonna follow Mahavira along his path, but I think this is definitely one of my favorite teachings from the chapter, for sure. Okay, just a few things. I've only got like half a page of notes here, so let me just kind of go through it real quick, make sure I don't miss anything important. So again, the monks and the nuns are the ones that are very ascetic. They're the ones that deny themselves the most of the worldly pleasures. They live a life of celibacy, right? Obviously, no sexual relations. They pay a physical penance, so their clothing can't be comfortable if they wear clothing at all. They have to fast, so don't eat hardly at all. Material simplicity. They have to sleep on the ground or on wooden slats. You know, so no comfort when they're sleeping. They can't live in very comfortable beds. They have to endure any weather or any condition with indifference. If it's hot, they can't wipe their brow. You know, if it's cold, they can't, shiver or whatever. They have to. This one is pretty intense. I don't know if they still practice it this way, but they don't have any hair. But you know how they shave their head? They pluck it out. Every hair individually, pluck it out at the root. Yeah. They have to accept social disapproval. People make fun of them. They can't get mad. They have to accept ridicule. They have to always depend on others for food. So that's a part of a Jain practice. If you're not a monk and you're just a Jain follower, one of your things you can do to make your karma, like your bad karma, be lessened is to give some food to the Jainist monks. But of course, only vegetarian, only vegan food. Obviously, you can't feel any pride, even in your own spiritual achievements. If you had a really good meditation session and you're like, ooh, that was a really good meditation session, I felt like I got progress. Oh, there goes all that progress. I felt good about it, right? So, wow, it's like super strict. You have to avoid digging in the ground. You can't dig in the ground. Remember, everything has these microscopic living organisms. You can't fan yourself. You can't fan yourself to comfort yourself. No walking on plants or vegetation. Now, on 127, I think it is, they list these 12 limited vows for the lay followers. So if you're not the monk, these are sort of what if you're just going to be a follower, you're not going to try to achieve liberation in this lifetime. Again, this is on page 127. So a vow of nonviolence, right? Ahimsa. A vow of truthfulness. Always got to be honest. This is why Jainist bankers are typically successful. They're successful businessmen, is they're thought of as very trustworthy, that they won't lie. They'll always be straight with you, okay? So again, nonviolence, truthfulness, not taking anything that hasn't been given, renouncing any sexual activity outside of marriage. So only you can't have sex before you get married, and only within marriage you can have sex. You have to limit your possessions. Again, minimalist lifestyle. You have to limit the geographic area of non-virtuous activities. That's interesting. So if you're going to break the rules, if you're going to be naughty and get drunk one night, you better not do it when you're traveling. Do it like close to your house or something, or pick an area. Like, again, limit the geographic area of non-virtuous activity. Limit the quantity of things that you will use. That seems to just tie into the minimalism. Abstain from purposeless, harmful activities. So all activities are going to be harmful, right? Wearing clothing is maybe harmful, but you got to wear it to go to work. You can't go to work naked even if you're a Jainist. I don't think they have, I don't know, maybe they have, maybe someone could try this. You go to work naked and be like, I get a religious exclusion from clothes, like, it'd be an interesting legal question. I'm not a lawyer,
That
so I don't know.
I guess that's why the religion is like there's very few followers.
Right, right. Well, they
Very few.
say, again, I think they would say you can wear clothes to work. That's harmful, but it's necessary because you got to go to work.
Yeah,
You're not a monk. So, okay, you can do that, but don't eat
yeah,
meat. You can be vegetarian and still go to work.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, again, abstain from purposeless harmful activities. So if it's not for a purpose that is necessary and it harms anything, don't do it. You have to meditate and read scriptures for at least 48 consecutive minutes in a day. So every day you got to read at least 48 minutes of scripture or do meditation, a combination of the two. You have to reduce for a fixed period the area of non-virtuous activities. So, whatever areas of your life where you're doing things that are naughty or whatever, you have to say, well, you know what, for a month, maybe this might be parallel or similar to to Ramadan in the Muslim tradition. During the month of Ramadan, all Muslims are supposed to fast and to be being as holy as they can possibly be. Not engaging in any non-virtuous activities, and even when they do eat, it's always after dark. I guess, but this one is, I guess, you pick a time, but just at some time, maybe once a year or whatever, as a lay Jain, try to be really strict on yourself occasionally, right? To take a break. A vow of fasting and living like an ascetic for a certain period, that seems a bit redundant. A vow of giving necessary articles to monks and nuns. Again, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. That's part of your practice as a Jain lay practitioner. All right, we're almost done. I think I've got like a third of a page left here. I just want to make sure I cover.
Question.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so those rules, the vows, those were for only people who followed, right, Jainism, but they were not monks
Right.
and nuns, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah, that's what you would follow. Like, again, so if you're Catholic, you don't have to take a vow of celibacy. The priest has to take a vow of celibacy, right? You're not
Oh
supposed to
yeah,
have
yeah.
you're not supposed to have sex until you get married if you're Catholic, but you can have
Okay.
sex. You can have sex, but it has to be within the sanctimonious of whatever. Similar thing here with Jainism, right? The
Okay.
Jainist practitioners, they can get married, they can have kids. The monks can't, right? So again, that list I just read was what your average Jain, what a normal average Jain, not the priest or the monks, as you
Okay.
might call them.
Got it.
So and if you look at the lay followers, they're divided. Some of them go to temple to worship, some don't go to temple. In fact, let me get back to the slideshow here. I just have a few slides left. Here's some Jain symbols. Look at that one on the left. That's the swastika, right? That's always a controversial one. In fact, I think some newer textbooks don't even show this. Which is unfortunate because it's an ancient symbol, and the Nazis, I guess, they just ruined it for everybody. It's a great symbol,
Mm.
but now it's associated with the Third Reich and racism and fascism. But does anybody know what it originally symbolizes?
Mm-mm.
It
No.
symbolizes samsara, so it's supposed to symbolize that cycle, that cycle of birth and
Oh,
rebirth,
okay.
right? I'm not sure.
That makes sense.
I used to know this, but I don't now remember. But I think that those 4 dots also, each of those symbolize something. This might be a Buddhist version of it. So those might be the 4 noble truths or something. But here's another Jain symbol on the right. That's a more common one you'll see with the hand with the symbol on the inside there. Right, that's another Jainist symbol you see quite a bit.
It's almost like the one on the right. It looks like isn't it like there's I don't know, there's like it's
There's a
upside
Native
down and like the
American.
evil eye. And yeah, right?
There's a few Native American cultures who had a similar symbol. It was a hand with an eye in it.
Yeah.
It's been so long since I studied that stuff, but I remember when I was an undergraduate before I went to grad school. One of my minor was religious studies, and I took a class in anthropology. We studied the mound builders, who were I guess North America, Northeastern America, and they had a lot of their their carvings and their pottery and some of their religious artifacts had this hand with the eye in it, and they think it was the Milky Way. They think it was, they would see in the night sky, or maybe it was the Big Dipper. I don't remember. It was some constellation that they think was seen as the eye, and then there was the fingers and all that stuff, and it had holy significance. They thought of it as a portal. And this is the Native Americans I'm talking about, not the Jains, right? Yeah, the Native Americans, they believe they saw it as a portal to the afterlife, that when you die, your spirit would go to the eye, this all-seeing eye, this universal eye or something. We really don't know for sure because we don't have a lot of evidence, but that's what this anthropologists kind of speculate was the belief behind that. But again, the Jains, right? This is sort of, I used to know what this one meant too, and now I don't really know. I'm looking at my notes and I don't see anything on this hand. Shame on me. But that certainly in the middle it looks like some form of Sanskrit in the middle. So I don't know what it says. This might be you know what I'm guessing? I'm going to guess this is probably the symbol for ahimsa, for non-violence, or maybe non-attachment. If I had to guess, it's one or the other. But this is, if you look up Jainism, this might be one of the first things that pops up as a Google image. It's always the thing that's associated with Jainism, the Jainist symbol. So again, I said I was going to show you some of these temples. There's some more of the symbols. There's that crescent moon with the sun Hinduism on top, right? So that's also in the Om symbol. If you know that Om symbol, you see that in yoga studios all the time. And in fact, if you use Google Maps, okay, they'll have on churches, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but on churches, they'll have a cross symbol, okay? And on Hindu temples, they have an Om symbol. At least they used to. I don't know if they still do. But I remember I was like looking for, I used to have this assignment for this class. You had to go visit a holy site and write a short paper about it. But now since COVID's happening, I'm not doing that this semester. And I was looking up some good sites to go to. And I was looking at the map and I was like, look, there's the Om symbol on the Google map, and it's, So if you look for like a church or a cathedral, it'll be a cross. If you look at it'll have the Om symbol. But I digress. Just like the Om symbol you see here, there's that crescent moon, and above that is the sun. So that represents sort of the male and the female, the light and the dark, these two elements in the universe. Below this, I think these three dots are the three jewels of Jainism. And again, this might be a Buddhist symbol. They share this symbol. Jainist and Buddhist both use the swastika. If this is Buddhist, that makes a bit more sense to me, because you could say that maybe the blue dots are the Four Noble Truths, and that the three dots are the three jewels of Buddhism, because Buddhism also has the three jewels. And then the top is maybe just also the light and the dark and the balance of the two. That might have been thrown in from because I think Taoism definitely blends with some forms of Buddhism. So if I had to guess, but anyway, let's wrap things up here. I just have a few images of Jain temples. I just wanted to show you some of these because this is one thing that Jainists are known for in India. A lot of people they'll walk by these temples, tourists, and they'll just assume they're Hindu temples. And sometimes you can't really tell the difference. I mean, this looks a lot like if you've ever been to the Mandir out in Sugar Land. That's a Hindu temple. It looks a lot like this.
Oh, I searched it up when I watched your video and I searched it up and it looks exactly like it.
Right.
Well, some
right.
way, yeah.
It's very similar. I think there's less, in the Hindu temple, the difference will definitely be in the Hindu temple, you will see a bunch of deities or devas. So you would see Ganesh, and you would see Shiva, and you would see the three-faced Brahma, and you'd see all these, and you'd even see animals and things like this, okay, that all have symbolic meaning. But here it's similar architecture, but I don't see any figures.
No gods.
I don't see any gods or it's just very symbolic. It's all patterns and things. But yeah, they're very beautiful looking. Yeah, see, there's no gods or deities. It's all just, hand carved and things like this. And again, there's some of these beautiful temples. This is another thing I think is kind of controversial. If you're not supposed to harm living things, don't these temples use a lot of rock? If I'm not supposed to kick a rock down the street,
That's
how can I
true.
use rock to build this temple? That seems to be a bit of a contradiction, but I guess the only defense that they could maybe make is that they didn't build it. They hired somebody else to do it. I don't know. But yeah, there's some Jainists who think that the best way to practice Jainism is to visit the temples and to go there to meditate and to help the monks. Others actually, it's almost like when we get to Christianity and we talk about Eastern Orthodox Christianity, some of them actually will, I don't want to say worship, but they'll honor the Tirthankaras through images of the Tirthankaras. To me, that seems kind of like attachment. So, I mean, if I were a Jainist, I don't know if I'd be in that camp, but definitely there are some lay followers who practice Jainism, much in the sense that you might say the Hindus practice the bhakti worship. Well, they'll go and they'll look at a statue of Shiva and they'll pray to it. They'll offer incense or some fruit to it, and they'll get real emotional and, oh, thank you for all that you've done for me, as like a way of being good. That sounds a bit like devotional and a bit of attachment. It seems to contradict some of the Jainist teachings, but apparently some Jains don't think that. They think that honoring the teachers, honoring the Tirthankara is fine, and it's actually a totally legit way to practice Jainism. And I guess their excuse, and this is what you get from a lot of, you're going to see this in Islam when we talk about some forms of Shia, especially the more mystical forms of it, like the the name escapes me. The mystical Muslims, not the Shia, but they're a subsect of the Shia. It's not important. I better remember by the time we get to Islam. But yeah, they honor many of their previous practitioners, and the Sufis. Thank goodness, the Sufis, right? So the Sufis will often honor previous practitioners of Sufism, and many other Muslims will criticize them for this. And let's say that's idolatry. Only Muhammad should be honored, and even him, he should only be honored as a role model. And some of them are going to say, well, they're just role models too, right? You get this from, I would say, a lot of Christians, especially the early Christian theologians, would be very critical of Islam because they think that they worship Muhammad, which is incorrect, and they think that it's a form of idolatry. But no, the defense from the Muslim would be, no, he's just a role model. So I guess these Jains who look at images of the Tirthankara as inspiration and use that as part of Jain practice, that would probably be their defense, right? That they're just role models. I'm looking at him for inspiration to be a good person myself, I suppose.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think this is all I wanted to say. Let me see. I got a few more images here. I guess I could show you. There's the inside of a Jainist temple. Very beautiful ceiling there. Look at that. And I would recommend, that can't be a Jainist temple. I got these on a Google search, but that one does have deities in it. If you look closely, the one on the left. Also. Yeah. So you can't always trust Google, I think, I probably should have been more careful looking at my images when I was curating this. But yeah, certainly this one is definitely a Jainist. If it was a Hindu, you would certainly see some gods in there, and you don't. But it's similar. Like if you go to the temple here, the one that we were talking about out in Sugar Land, when it's open, when you walk into the center of it, it's like this. It's got this circular ceiling, this rotunda. But in the Hindu temple, instead of having all these just sort of like ornate pillars, each of these represents a different deva, different deity. There's another Jain temple. It almost looks like a Muslim mosque, like a masjid. This one does, right? If you've ever seen one of those, the designs, the patterns that are on the pillars there don't look like they're from a mosque. Mosques seem to have more straight and edges and stuff like that, triangular. You don't see flowers and things usually in a mosque, so that would be different. But the coloring, I think, looks quite similar to what you would see inside of certain mosques, or I should say a masjid, right? Mosque is actually a Western word given to masjid, right? So which is actually the Muslim word for a temple. But anyway, let me see. Do I have any other slides left? No, that was it. So all I have left in my notes is that they also practice many festivals, and there's many holidays associated with them. One that is a big deal is Diwali. And if you've ever been to a Diwali celebration, I would, it's a lot of fun, even if you're not a Jain or a Hindu. But this is a celebration they both share. Believe it or not, there are quite a few Jainists in Houston. Not as many Jainists as there are Hindus, but I have met some Jains, and they usually go to the Diwali celebrations. You'll find them there, right? They'll be there along with the Hindus celebrating as well. So anyway, we're over for time. I'm sorry I kept y'all till 1:30, but we got started late, so I guess that's what happened. So I hope I didn't make you late to any appointments or anything like that. But I better shut up and just I'll open the floor. Does anybody have any last minute comments or questions? Or anything else to add before I close the meeting up? Okay, well, like I said earlier.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
the chapter was really, yeah.
What was that?
No, the chapter was really short. So I kind of understood. It comes mostly from Hinduism.
There's a lot of parallels with Hinduism.
Yeah.
It's a pretty simple, straightforward religion.
Yeah.
I think so. I think this will probably be one of the easier quizzes. And speaking of quizzes, I think I said this earlier when Stephanie and Mercedes were here, but I don't know if Cecilia. I'm gonna try to grade the first two quizzes this afternoon before the next meeting. So before 7 o'clock tonight, when the Buddhism lecture begins. So start looking for your grades tonight or tomorrow. Those should be posted up on D2L. But unless anybody has anything else to add, I'll go ahead and stop it there. That's it.
And you said tonight was the 7 o'clock one for the Buddhism?
That's right, 7 to 8:30. Okay. But it probably will be shorter. I try to keep these meetings to about an hour, more or less. So we'll start at 7 or so and probably go to about 8, I'm guessing. So if you want to show up, hope you can. Hope you can make it. All right, thanks a lot for showing up. I'll see you guys around. Best of luck. Cheers.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.